Okay, here we go. All right, so good morning. I'm Michelle Payne, and I love Tucson. You guys are great. This is my, I don't know, 4th or 5th time coming out here over the past few years. Initially speaking at the Impact Tucson events where you had families come out and young people come out on a Saturday and really get jazzed up and excited about getting ready for school. And that was a really powerful event because I saw the commitment of the district to engage the families in a meaningful way, not just in a, okay, enroll for school, hurry up. And so I've really started to do some work with you all and looking at some of the schools and doing some walk-arounds to really look at how you all are moving the needle on the goals that you have around student outcomes, right? And so a little bit about myself and why I'm here and why you're listening to me. I have experience in, well, how should we do this? I can say this. So in my dissertation, I did my doctoral studies around educational leadership, and I did my dissertation on disproportionate suspension of African American males. And what I discovered in my research is that the problem is systemic, right? It was an easy topic to pick when you're doing your doctoral studies. You want to pick something that's been already heavily researched. You don't want to try to pick something brand new because it's going to be hard to find in research. So that's why I picked something like suspension, right? Low-hanging fruit. But all of the articles were talking about disproportionate suspension from the standpoint of what is wrong with these kids, right? And when I realized that that was the lens, I said, oh, no. We have to look at this differently. So I started looking at systems. So a lot of the work that I've done in my career has been aimed at systems. I coordinated the Oakland Youth Commission long time ago, and it was around engaging young people around policy issues that affected young people in the city. That rolled into a project called Youth Uprising, which was a youth center that was built from the feedback of young people. So everything from looking at the property, meeting with the architect, designing what programs would be in the building. Young people participated in every level of the planning for this youth center. And after getting my degree then as a professor, a social work professor, I did a lot of mental health work in the schools. And so the mental health work led us to the understanding of, what's the word? Trauma, right? So what is trauma? Does anybody? Raise your hand if you have a pretty solid concept of what trauma is as it pertains to our students. Yeah, just raise your hand. Just go like this, yep. Okay, so that's about 4% of the room. So great. So we're gonna really have some fun here. So what I want to do is first have you all get into yourself. Okay. And so at your table you already have a natural group. Some of you have 5 people at your table. Some of you have 3 at your table. So you have to manage your time. I will give you 10 minutes. And if you need a lot more time, maybe 2 more minutes after that. But what I want you to do is I want you to go around and each person share with the other people at your table, A, where you grew up, B, what's the best and what's the worst neighborhood you've ever lived in. All right? And so I'm going to put that slide up so you don't have to memorize the questions. So, any questions? Clarification? You're going to manage yourselves as a group for 10 minutes, going around taking turns answering these questions. Number 3 and number 4 is bonus if you can talk fast. So each person at the table, if you have 4 or 5 people, try to limit your answers to 1 or 2 minutes. All right? Got it? And if it's 2 of you, you can take 5 minutes. Just go. All right? Any questions? All right, go. All right, can I get everyone's attention? Thank you. I'm sorry. Some of you are in the middle of describing something that's very important to you, and some of you may not have had a chance to go yet, but I apologize. I take your time very seriously. What is the purpose of these questions? So nickname. How many of you have a nickname? Or have had nicknames growing up, right? What does that mean? What does it mean when you have a nickname? You're very loved, right? And you're a part of a community, right? If you have a nickname, you usually, who gives you a nickname? Your family, right? And they give you a little nickname, and then you go out, and then somebody hears you. Okay, funny story. I'm walking down the street with a friend of mine. I'm like 10 years old. And my uncle drives down the street, and his nickname for me, and picture this super small, skinny kid. And my uncle drives by, he's like, "Hey, big boy." That was his nickname for me. And my friend, he turns, he goes, "Big boy?" He was like, "Oh, this is crazy." So nicknames are indicators of our background, where we come from, right? The neighborhood question. What are some insights you all maybe spoke about or thought about when identifying not only the best neighborhood or the worst neighborhood, but why? Why was it the best neighborhood? Why was it the worst neighborhood? Are there any insights? Oh, by the way, this is a fully interactive workshop. I know there's, some of you might have been voluntold to come here, but I want to invite you to be fully present and not just be like, okay, I'm a power down, I'm on, what is it called? The screensaver. I don't want you on a mental screensaver right now. I want you engaged. So what's the insight on what makes a neighborhood good or what makes a neighborhood bad? Yes?
Safety.
Safety. Describe the elements of safety really quickly.
That you go home and you know that there's no one going to break into your home, or that there won't be violence around your home, or there's access to resources around you.
Awesome. Absolutely. Yes.
I find it as attitude.
Say more.
Well, I mean, I live in some pretty tough neighborhoods, and I would find it, I think there's a way I hosted my family approached it, and so I didn't see, yes, it's dangerous, everywhere's dangerous. So maybe I just saw it as this is the way it is, and you just find ways to cope with it. Mm-hmm. And it can be dangerous, like any situation can be dangerous, so that's how I see it.
Good or bad for who? And to whom?
Myself,
right.
well, to
right.
myself.
Well, yeah, it's
I deal with it. You know, what's bad to me, and I think it's something that you get taught, is that you can live in a tough neighborhood and whatever tough is to you, and still be able to maneuver in that area if you know the rules or the laws or whatever the rules are in that community or.
Right. Yeah, so basically the Cliff Notes is you can go to a bad neighborhood and there's actually people that live there that are actually just trying to live their lives, right? And it's a bad neighborhood or it's a safety issue because of larger structural inputs, right? You can't say one person made a choice to have a whole neighborhood be considered a bad neighborhood, right? It's a collective impact, right? So these are the things that we know, and I'm from Oakland, and I'm gonna get your comment because you are too. And Oakland, if you're up on the whatever perception of Oakland, it's got a really good reputation right now, right? Not just the Warriors, but it's just like a happening spot. 5 years ago, going back to when I was born, Oakland had a bad rep. You say you from Oakland, they're like, don't shoot, right? And so, let me get your comment.
Okay, as far as neighborhood, I think whether it's marginalized, I think economics has a lot to do with it, because the neighborhood I grew up in, to me, it wasn't a worse neighborhood growing up in it, you know what I'm saying? But we had a lot of disadvantages, but actually it was such a safety there, and the neighborhood was more close-knit neighborhood than say the neighborhood I live in now, where, it's much more, economically advantaged, but the connection, there's no connection with the people.
So how many of you feel like you live in a good neighborhood right now, today? You just drove out of a pretty decent neighborhood. Keep your hand up if you know at least the first name of your neighbor to your left and the neighbor to your right. That's awesome. That's good. That's excellent. Definitely if you're in the hood, you know your neighbors, right? I live in a pretty decent neighborhood by the lake in Oakland. I wave to my neighbors every single day. I don't know their name. Why don't I stop and have a conversation with them, right? So there's things wrong with all of us. But so the neighborhood piece is really to get us grounded in where we come from. Because when we come into the schools, raise your hand if you're a counselor. Awesome. Raise your hand if you're a social worker. All right, raise your hand. We have any teachers? We have any other admin? If you're not a counselor or a social worker, but you're here and you're important and you have a role. Awesome. Awesome. So it's important because you all are the ones that understand when kids show up in crisis, what that's about, first thing in the morning, right? And so I wanted to ground us in that because when I get dressed and I get in my car and I drive into work, I'm coming in with all these good feelings, right? I had a hot shower, I had a breakfast, I got my coffee, and I'm encountering people and I'm expecting them to respond and have the resources that I have. Excuse me, what's wrong? What's going on? Don't talk to me, right? And so we have to recognize and understand it starts for us where we live, right? And so the last two questions also are indicators in terms of what we know makes for a successful student learning experience and growing into healthy adulthood is being supported by an adult, a caring adult. The number one outcome, durable outcome over years, mentorship, whether it's a caring teacher. So quick fun fact, they say you can go through K through 12. How many teachers, how many good teachers do you need to have a good shot at going to college? I think it's like 2. I think it's like 2. If you have 2 good teachers, so I mean, think about, you know how many bad teachers? And I'm not bashing teachers. I married one, okay? So it's not about that. It's about how we're setting ourselves up as a system. So thank you all for participating in that. Now, the reason why I opened up with us grounding ourselves in our own self and our own culture is because this is the root of the concept of trauma that we're dealing with in the schools. So the concept of trauma originates with the concept of war, where you had a situation called shell shock. You had a diagnosis called shell shock, and they applied it to soldiers who came back and were no longer in a combat situation. And I apologize for the veterans in the room or relatives of veterans, because it could be triggering, right, to even talk about this. And then being in the United States and having flashbacks and trauma related to having been in that combat zone and what they've experienced in that combat zone. It doesn't impact all, but it impacted a significant number enough for them to come up with a diagnosis and come up with a way of addressing it. At the time they came up with this in the 50s, they didn't think it affected young people. Why? Because they believed that young people had this bounce back, this resilience that you can't really mess them up when they're kids. Well, now we know everything is the absolute reverse. The easiest thing to do is to mess up children, right? And we do it all the time. And so fast forward, we started seeing young people with the same symptoms as this shell shock, this trauma. So we're saying, oh, so young people can be traumatized and it can affect them for the rest of their lives. Right? So these are realizations that were like, duh, but we're taking decades to get from one conclusion to the next conclusion, right? This has taken 10 years to understand the nature of trauma in schools. And so in Oakland, they have an effort called trauma-informed trainings, right? And trauma-informed care. And the tenets of trauma-informed care is basically understanding that really what we're talking about is anxiety, right? Anxiety is something that we all have, right? It's like, oh, I got to go to the train. I don't know what it's going to be like. Am I going to sit next to my, am I going to find my colleagues, whatever, or am I going to get a ticket? All normal stuff we all go through in a day-to-day basis. Trauma is when the stress exceeds their capacity to cope, all right? And so what are we talking about? Capacity for coping, right? What is your threshold for coping? What happens in your life? Answer for yourself. What happens in your life that pushes you to the point where you're like, I can't deal with this. I need someone else to handle this, right? That's when we're getting into the realm of trauma. but it's also a situation that you can't escape. So, right? And abuse describes this perfectly, right? Because it's too much to handle and they can't escape. And so a lot of things happen to the brain when they're under that type of trauma, especially if the trauma is being caused by adults that they depend on and rely on, right? So that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with the human reality that as parents, I'm a parent, right? I do workshops around fatherhood. And my premise is failure is the secret to being a good father. Because if you're a dad, you make mistakes. Mothers, we're not even gonna get into that, the mommy guilt and all. I mean, it's super duper do right. As a dad, don't feel sorry for me. I walk around with my son and they're like, wow, he's a great dad. He's actually in the vicinity of his child. So wonderful, he's great. But no, you know, stuff like, Dad, there's no milk. You didn't get the chips. Where's my lunch? You forgot to, right? So just little stuff like that, right? As parents, I'm gonna keep bringing it back to us, right? Because that's how we're gonna have the understanding of what these young people are going through and how we can do what we do. If you notice, I have theories and concepts. We're gonna get to that, right? So if you're here and you're kind of waiting for or looking for, I want A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, I've got that. Don't worry, I'll put the slide up. But I want us to really get grounded in what we're doing to ourselves first before we try to come as a professional collective and really move the needle on what's happening to our students, to our children. So I've mentioned this is maybe my 4th or 5th time coming to Tucson, and every single time I come into that airport, I catch an Uber or a Lyft to my hotel, and then the next morning to the venue, wherever I'm doing it. And without fail, they see, doctor, what kind of doctor are you? Where are you from? So we have the same conversation with my Uber and Lyft drivers every time. Oh, you're from Oakland. Do you like the Raiders? Da, da, da. And then eventually they get to, well, what are you doing in Tucson? Oh, I'm gonna talk to your school district, talk to your teachers, and let me tell you, from the first time to this morning, every single time, these drivers have stories. They have TUSD stories. Yeah, uh-oh is right. Uh-oh, because if Tucson is anything like Oakland, when you get to the general public, oh yeah, we can easily point the finger at the mean old school district and how they're just, nobody's doing their job and da-da-da-da-da. And then I'm always like trying to, well, there's other, I'm like getting into this really deep debate with my Uber driver. But there's always stories, and what they'll do is they'll tell a story about their daughter or about their nephew. And it'll always be a story of failure for a black or brown student in Tucson. The story I got this morning, I was like, wow, really? He was like, well, that was 16 years ago. I was like, that's a long time to hold on to that. But it was his daughter. His daughter dropped out of school because she found out at the last minute that she needed 5 more credits. So we know that there's a narrative. We know once you're in the system how hard it is to attain this type of change for these students. But nevertheless, we are faced with bad publicity, limited resources, and this gargantuan expectation to raise up and protect our future, our children, our students. So I'm going to talk today a lot about culturally responsive being. Not even next week I'm coming back to talk about interventions, and then we're going to get into a little bit of the science of crisis and how to deal with that. But I really wanted to lay the groundwork that when we're talking about trauma-informed care and how to respond to students who are in crisis, we need to be grounded in our culture. And the culture is not just about race, black, white, Latino, etc. Culture is about who you are, what you do, what is your family, right? Because when you go within cultural groups or racial groups, there's all kinds of divisions, right? Yeah? indeed. And so I want to find out from you all before I say another word, what are the significant challenges? And this is a process, again, I need full participation. What are the significant challenges that you're facing in the schools as counselors or social workers? This is going to be table talk, and we're going to take 5 minutes. So each person go around and, hey, I think these are the big issues, and then we'll go around and get some examples from a few of the tables to have a larger discussion. Any questions, clarifications? Okay, what are the big issues that you all are dealing with? Go. If we could quickly get a few folks to volunteer categorically, like safety, home life, whatever. What are the issues categorically? You don't have to give me the whole context. Just and by the way, I'm roaming around. I'm not looking in your purses. I'm trying to ear hustle to hear what you're saying, so don't mind me. Yes, hand up in the back. Attendance. Put this over here. What else? Keep going.
Lack of resources.
Parenting.
A lot of that drug use, appearance, no time because of multiple jobs, incarceration. Oh yeah, group homes. Bees and grandparents raising children.
Oh, good Lord. Okay. I get it. Okay. Wow. Okay. All right. Wow. Okay.
We got this part.
Y'all got this part down. Okay. So what do we do? And what are we doing? Yes.
But I think all those issues go back to mental health, and that the schools are becoming mental health clinics. And this is my pet peeve, in that schools and mental health is breaking down, and so now the schools are having to pick that up also.
Mm-hmm. So I have heard that before as a social worker and educator, and while I agree, when you apply for a job as a teacher, they don't necessarily, or they didn't necessarily tell you, you also have to be versed in social emotional learning, and you have to be engaged, and you have to be empathetic and compassionate to this. I mean, so I run an organization in East Oakland called Youth Uprising, and we have in our job descriptions stuff like empathy, critical thinking, humor. We tell people, when you come to work here, you got to be able to laugh at yourself and other stuff. Don't take yourself too seriously. And part of the issue, right, is schools are sort of the last morally decent institution in America. That's my opinion. And so that is why we are expecting the adults that are in charge of the children in our public schools to have empathy. That's all we're talking about. Mental health is a big fancy word. It's a big fancy phrase. There's a lot of money in getting certified and licensed and as a clinician or all of that. But basically what we're talking about is human beings having the capacity to be their emotional selves, the adults, to be their emotional selves and have a certain level of emotional regulation that allows them to withstand the trauma of working in the school system, right? So I'm just going to state that, right? It is a traumatic experience when you all are quickly naming all of these things that are on the tip of your tongue that our families are dealing with. If I said, what are you dealing with internally? List would be equally as long, equally as rapid, right? So we first have to manage our own trauma and our own capacity and say, hey, you know what? I came here to teach, and I don't expect me to deal with behavior in a creative way. Either you get with it or you get gone. Is that what we're saying? All right, so let me just break this down. I would say I'm successful in life, not because I'm particularly smarter than anybody else. Not at all. But because I was that quiet kid. I could sit there and get a solid C doing no work. And people, you know, and I was just quiet, and people thought I was thinking of really smart stuff, right? Because I wasn't saying stupid stuff, right? So all of that, I'm giving you the Cliff Notes. All of that led to people seeing me as a successful, smart black kid You know, and then I kind of grew up into that reality, okay? And so, but what I've learned in the process is any one of us could accomplish what we want if people believed in us in that way. And one of the things that, if in the same vein, I've heard teachers who are really good, right? You've seen the videos of the teachers that do the handshake with every student before they go into class, right? Isn't that so sweet and cool and everything? We don't know what happens in the class after the handshake, but that was a cool video. You know, I was like, oh, that was nice, that was sweet. But the teachers that are good at that, oh, they're proud, right? That's a skill that they're proud of. They're like, right, I teach because I care, right? And it's because they have the capacity and the skill to do so. Not because they're better or care more than the teacher that's like, I'm gonna go ballistic, right? I've heard teachers like describe military imagery. I'm serious, you know. And so we have to recognize that the way we are teaching, the way we are, this whole system is very narrow. There is a narrow expectation. There's a narrow, so basically what I'm saying is we teach, and same thing when I was a professor. The students that learned and participated the way I taught, oh, they did great. The students that needed something different that I wasn't giving, they struggled. Dr. Payne, I need subtitles, I need this, right? They struggled. And I'm sorry. The students that were just verbal and could listen to me talk all day, oh, they loved it, right? So we have to recognize and understand we're all different. How many of you getting your DNA done now? How many, you know, oh, I'm from here, from here, from here. We have all kinds of different genetic traits that relate and correspond to how we teach and learn. And so if the way I teach and learn is compatible with the way you teach and learn, we're going to get along. Famously, we're going to communicate really well. But sometimes that's not happening. And so if as the teacher or the counselor or the adult, my communication style, my emotional regulation is not matching that of the student because of ultimately cultural background differences. That's it, that's all. Nobody's the bad guy in this situation, but these are significant cultural differences that create our experience is then different than yours because where we come from, we see the world differently. And that's beautiful, but it becomes an issue when we are trying to get something done and we have to navigate that, right? We have to navigate that lack of alignment with students. And so all of this stuff that's happening that folks mentioned, besides attendance, I mean, I stopped after like 9 or 10, but attendance relates to schools. But we really are good at identifying all the problems that are out there, right? When I used to go to school, you just got up, got dressed, and hopped on a bus or went walking to your school. And the same thing to get home, right? You hop back on a bus. Now, then I have kids, I take them to school. Why are all the parents dropping the kids off and all the parents are picking their kids up at 3? When did we start doing this? When did this start happening? This is not in Tucson? Yes. Yeah. When did that, I'm serious, when did that start happening? And so there's a higher expectation on the parents. What's that? The busing? Oh, no. Okay, so there's a huge problem going on in Oakland right now. They're getting ready to shut down 24 schools over 3 years. I'm gonna say that again. They're right now currently identifying 24 schools to shut down. Now, some of them are sites that have 2 schools and they're gonna merge them back into 1 school because thanks to Bill and Melinda Gates, they brought millions of dollars to Oakland in the early 2000s to small schools. We need small schools, no more than 100 kids, right? And then just totally destabilized the district, created twice as many administrators, drove the budget up. Now they're cutting 24 schools. Thank you, Bill. All right, so why did I tell you that? Because here's what's gonna happen, right? Of those 24 schools, this is confidential because we're organizing right now. there's been 19 school closures over the past 10 years in Oakland, and every single school except 2 has had over 60% African American students. Now, what we're dealing with now in Oakland is African Americans are actually a smaller number than Latino students. So Latino students are actually a higher group. So now the district is scrambling, trying to figure out how to serve this growing Latino population, right? But the bottom line is, when these schools close, those students are going to have to go to the schools that aren't being closed. Now, the schools that aren't being closed, why are they not being closed? Why are they not being considered for closure? Because they've got the attendance, they've got the enrollment, they've got the test scores. And they don't have a large number of African American or Latino students. But they do have African American Latino students that have parents with resources. So they feel pretty good about how they work with Black and brown students, and we don't have a disproportionate suspension rate. I had my son in 1st grade at this school in the Oakland Hills, and they didn't even suspend. They didn't even suspend kids. It was like kids get into a fight, they just call the parents, hey, you know. It wasn't even an issue. So the issue with the 24 schools being closed is those students, those Black and brown students, who the school is being closed because low enrollment, low test scores, right? And these are the bad neighborhoods, right, that are economically under-resourced, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what happens when those students go to the Hill schools and the more affluent schools? What's going to happen? Remember my dissertation topic? What's that? Oh, that suspension rate's going to go through the roof. Why? Because they're used to dealing with Dr. Payne's kid, and then they call him, they send him a text, he'll stop the workshop and go find out what's going on. And then now they have this other kid, just as bright and loving as Dr. Payne's son, just as bright. But the parent has 3 jobs, has trauma, had bad experiences when they were in middle school, so on and so forth. The list goes on and on and on and on. And then that teacher, that counselor, that administrator is going to be like, oh, this is too much. Trauma. Can't deal with it. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to talk to my school district, Oakland, about, let's talk about how we're going to resource these schools where these kids are going to go, right? We have a bifurcated strategy to stop the school closures, of course, right? That's the first line of defense. But, you know, I'm further down the road. Like, when we get to this eventual reality, this is what you need to do, school district. Yeah. You need to go to these schools and you need to say, who are your adults that know how to work with this population? Have them train the rest of the, right? So what I did when I came to Tucson was a method that I used when I was in Oakland in graduate school and doing workshops for schools. Is I would never just show up and start talking like I'm doing right now. I would come a day or a week before, or even earlier that day if it was an afternoon workshop, and I would go around and observe the school, observe the teachers, observe the students. I would ask the principal, hey, send me to the class you would never send your boss to. I want to see that teacher. I want to see those kids, right? Because then when I talk to the adults that you're employing to deal with them, I need to know what they're working with, right? And these are the things that help us understand ourselves better, right? And so today, before you all leave here, I hope to review critical race. So critical race is the, what do they call, theoretical framework for how I was looking at suspension in schools as a systemic defect. Say that again. Critical race basically identifies that America has a systemic defect. And that systemic defect is othering, otherwise known as racism, sexism, so on and so forth. So it's a systemic defect that says this stuff happens by default. Sorry. I left the Master Social Work program, and when we're talking about what happens to our students in elementary and middle and high school, Well, dang it, it's even worse in college. These are the black and brown kids that get to college. And in colleges, they're getting the worst outcomes. So we're gonna go over that just a little bit. And it's basically the Rodney King effect, right? So when Rodney King, some of you might be a little young for that, but those of you that know, you know. Rodney King, this black man, was savagely beat on videotape. This was before everything was videotaped, everywhere, all the time, right? And so it was a big deal because it was these police officers beating this man. And it immediately divided the country because for people that, you know, didn't experience police brutality or racism, said, oh, this is horrible. Those officers just were way out of line from how all other police officers in America would respond. It was just these guys. And they just happened to be videotaped, right? That's the perspective of, let's say, half the country. The perspective of the other half of the country was what? Oh, this happens all the time. This happens every day. Thank God somebody finally caught it on camera. Two completely opposing perspectives on the same truth that this man was savagely beat. So critical race says the latter, right? This is something that's happening all the time when we're not watching. And when we watch, oh, okay, there's no racism because we're watching, we're paying attention, we're involved, we're engaged. But then we say, oh, okay, everything's good. The system will default, and we'll get into that. I want to introduce the concept of cultural humility, which is sort of the 2.0 to cultural competence, and we'll go over that really briefly. And then I'm gonna talk about our language, the language that we use. So in exasperation, the students that hear us and the other students that we're talking about, we use language. We use language to describe the students we like. We use language to describe the students that give us trouble. And I'm gonna talk about how we need to watch that language. And then we're gonna talk a little bit about microaggressions and hopefully connect this to our identities culturally and how we move through the system dealing with these issues. All right, so I wanna play a game. All right, so you all, it's a visualization game, okay? So what you're gonna do is you're gonna close your eyes and you're gonna think of a neurologist, okay? So this neurologist is at the UCLA Medical Center, and they're going in to work on a famous movie star. This neurologist is talking to the patient, and the neurologist says, well, we have to, okay, open your eyes. What race was the neurologist in your visualization? How many of you saw a black man? How many of you saw a Latina neurologist in your visualization? Okay, the Latina saw a Latina. All right, so how many of you legit saw a white man in your visualization? How many of you saw a white woman? Oh, okay, all right. So you get the picture, right? So I don't have to do the thug and drug addict, do I? I don't have to do that, right? Y'all get the picture, right? So are you bad? No, you're not bad. That's how you've been taught, right? That's how you've been programmed automatically, right? Is to assume. And so when we talk about where that comes from, why that happens, I used to like to spend a lot of time on that. Not anymore. Just recognize it, know that it's there. When I say there, it's there. Not just, it's in my brain too, right? I have to make an extra effort to think of a Latina doctor or a black woman doctor or an Asian doctor. I have to make an extra effort. Because if by default, you're not in a workshop, you're at Starbucks, and you're just talking to somebody casually, and they're like, yeah, I went to the doctor and the neurologist, boom. Word association, you're gonna immediately add a whole profile to it. We did some branding work at the last organization I worked for, and they asked an interesting question. It was a $22 million organization, 200 staff. We did mental health all over the county. And he asked a really interesting question. He said, if Lincoln, that was the name of the organization, if Lincoln was a person, describe that person. And I was like, oh, Lincoln would be a white woman. And folks were offended But I'm like, this is an organization that has 80% white staff, and the majority of them are white female. Nothing wrong with it, but let's be real. Let's understand how Lincoln is perceived, right? And how Lincoln embodies that, right? And so we have to get real about how we associate, and it's the brain trying to be efficient. There's too much. There's too much that you're taking in on a day-to-day basis. So the brain has to narrow it down, and that's what we do. That's what stereotypes are. It's just a brain efficiency, right? It's how we make mistakes, trying to be efficient. But it's critical, and I want us to really, really, really understand that it's not something that happens to people that are in a position of privilege only, right? This is something that is happening to the families. I heard some of the conversations talking about the choices now that students have around even going to school or not, right? I ran a program around attendance where we're trying to convince the parents to send their 5-year-olds to school and how critical and important it is for them with their learning. They're learning how to learn, right? That's what they're doing in the first few years of school, and how critical it is, even more critical than later on. So the critical race activity that we just did allows us to just, and we can move quickly past it, just know that it's there and be able to see it when it's consciously in front of you, okay? We could talk about consequences. We could talk about disparate consequences from one boy to another boy, or from one boy to a girl, or so on and so forth. But basically, we're talking about privilege. And privilege is something that we should all have. Everyone should have privilege. I think everyone should be privileged. I think we should all have everything that we need, right? But we don't. There's limited resources, there's limited time, there's limited space, and we're in competition with each other. And that creates a hierarchy, a social hierarchy, and it's been around for a while. None of us are responsible for it, but we're all in it, right? And so that is how society is able to sort, right? You're interviewing people, and you're discriminating, you're being biased, right? You're not trying to. So one of the things I do when I'm hiring, and we sit around and we do panel interviews, after the interviewees leave, I lay my biases on the table. Oh, this person came a little too dressed up, or they didn't dress up enough, or I have this bias around this, I have this bias around that. When you put your bias on the table, you can wipe it clean. Or I put it on the table and somebody else says, yeah, but that's not really a bias because I also da-da-da-da, and then they have some other information to triangulate or whatever. And so don't be afraid of your bias. Claim it, grab it, put it out there, make fun of it, right? That's the only way you're gonna retrain your brain, right? Because the anxiety comes from the fear, right? We all have fear, by the way, in this whole race situation. It seems like for people of color that they're always fighting to be acknowledged, right? That more needs to be done to really support them. I'm sorry, I have my set places I walk to now, and so I'm sorry. They got me blacked off right here. But you have your go-tos, right? And that's how our brain works. And so we have to break out deliberately, right? So the roots of this really is around, how many of you heard of the GOP? What is the guy? He said, what's wrong with white supremacy? I really appreciate that he did that. I do. Because it's a question, right? And I skipped my intro, really. I discovered in my second year of undergrad at Berkeley that I love questions better than answers, right? Because the answer stops your thinking, right? If you ask me, well, how do we deal with a kid who is cussing, and I say, oh, well, that's easy. You just turn around and walk away, or you get somebody else in the room and then you did it right. Whatever I tell you, you're like, oh, okay. And then you start thinking about lunch, right? But if I give you a question, what are some ways you can do that differently? I don't know. Oh, well, we should think about that. You're right. Then all of a sudden you're going to be struggling. And the reason why I've discovered this, that I like questions better than answers, because I had this professor. He was my favorite professor. He was everybody's favorite professor. But he did this one thing. He would set you up, and then he would say, yeah, but the Irish are treated like black people. And then they became white. You know what I mean? He just had so much information that I would always leave his lectures with more questions than answers. And that frustrated the hell out of me, right? Think brain pattern, right? This the C student, all I gotta do is be quiet. And it wasn't until college that I became passionate about learning in an academic setting. Because I learned that the trick is not to be given the answers, which is what we're hired and trained to do, and given curriculums through the Yazoo, to give our kids the answers. Well, now we've got the right size and the Common Core, right, where 2 plus 2 no longer equals 4, right? You have to do a grid, and you have to, like, you know, do all kinds of stuff. And you didn't show your work. No, but it's 4. What are you talking about, right? So now we know that we have to do it earlier. So imagine if I was asking questions at 5 or 6 or 7. My son does that. It's frustrating. Get in the car. Where are we going? I'll tell you when you get in the car. I'll tell you in the car. Right? Lots of questions. I'm like, I didn't ask. And at first I'm like, I never asked questions of my parents. And then I'm like, why didn't I ask questions of my parents? Right? You know? So what we have to do is figure out what our students are experiencing. And we you know, I had a conversation with a young person at a non-public school when I was working at Lincoln. And non-public schools are when they are disabled, right? Lagging skills, delays, etc. They send them to a non-public school. And it's basically like a group home school, basically. And you'll have a teacher, 7 or 8 students, and 3 or 4 adults running around. Like, that's how crazy the environment is. And I remember sitting down with one of the boys and really sitting down saying, listen, man, you're just behaving all this, you're doing all this stuff, but this is a 7th grade class, right? This is 7th grade class. Do you know what you're supposed to be learning in 7th grade? They had some dittos or worksheets. So I started talking about science and math and social studies and environmental stuff and saying, this is what you should be learning right now in 7th grade. You should be learning about this. And for the first time, I saw this boy's eyes like open up and almost tear up, like, you know, because I realized afterwards I was just reminding him how far behind he was. So I don't know if I was doing him a favor necessarily, but I had to say something. I'm like, I'm going directly to the kid now. I'm like, look, I know that it's way more fun to just act up. It's way more stimulating. I get it. But this is what you're missing. And has anyone told you that? I need you to be aware, right, of what's going on. So, okay, what I want to talk about in terms of, we're going to fast forward. Okay, so this is I love this topic. The dress code, yes. So you guys got the dress code, right? What did you go through to come up with that dress code? We're talking about the middle school. Oh, no dress code? You guys are good on that. Some people do, some people don't? Okay. It's a big deal in California. It's a big deal. So, okay, I'll just tell you. All right. What's that?
Khakis and polo shirts.
No, I'm talking about the middle school dress codes where you can't wear leggings, you can't.
That's middle school.
Yeah.
Right.
Middle school have just uniforms.
Yeah.
Oh, all your middle schools have uniforms?
Not all of them. We have khakis
Some
and
of
polos.
khakis and polos. Okay, so, and if you got uniforms, that's a different debate. But if the kids, the point of the dress code is what? For those schools that have dress codes, yes?
So the girls don't look sexualized.
Thank you. So whose problem is that?
That's the adult's problem.
That's the adult's problem. I know somebody disagrees with me. Come on, be bold, be brave. Say, no, that's doing too much. These girls need to, yes.
I disagree, because I've talked to girls about it, and they don't always feel comfortable with guys sagging in front of them. And there are boys who like to just be boys not looking at breasts all the time because it's awkward for them. I mean, they're interested, but at the same time, so I think it's a problem both ways sometimes, you know, because not everyone's comfortable with seeing each other's bodies all the time, but they're not allowed to say that out in the open because they're not comfortable.
And that's valid, and I want to acknowledge that that's how it is in this country, and it's been like that for a long time, right? Okay, so some girls don't feel comfortable seeing sagging pants, seeing somebody's underwear, and some of the boys are being triggered basically and not knowing how to handle seeing breasts, right? And so her point being, well, these children are going through, they don't need to see people's bodies all the time. And I validated that statement because that's where we're at in this country. We have to go outside of this country frequently when you get in the research world to find other societies that have done it differently and had different results. So when I was on the Teen Pregnancy Prevention Board for the California Wellness Foundation, that was a big, huge issue in the 90s, teen pregnancy. It really was, first of all, a cultural thing, right, to say, oh, don't have children, teen babies. But ultimately, it became an issue that we had to look at Europe. And in Europe, they didn't have the restrictions on sexuality, on imagery, on a bunch of stuff in Europe. And you know how if you want to do you want to teach a course about sexuality, sex ed, et cetera, you got to get parent permission, blah, blah, blah. They didn't have all of that, and they had a much lower teen pregnancy pregnancy rate. So the theory is that, same thing with guns, right? No guns in my house, but when my kids, 2 boys, right, 3.5 years apart, as they were growing up, my brilliant wife read the research on that and said, well, if you say no guns and you don't get them any toy guns and you prevent them from even making a gun with their hand and they're going to want the gun more. They're going to be obsessed with guns if they have an interest and you deny them access to, and I'm like, that's dumb. But we got 12 Nerf guns all lying around the house, and they don't use none of them, right? So, you know, these are examples. These are examples where what seems like common sense actually is not what's happening. What's happening when you do the dress code and when you have to send girls, because the boys, all they got to do is this. The girls got to get sent home, or they got to get sweaters or this or that. And I'm not landing either way on this. I'm saying when we look at this, there's a disproportionate responsibility put on girls, on their dress. And then you want to get into cultural differences, right? Certain body types, certain clothes on certain body types versus certain clothes on other body types. Now, we're not just talking about kids that shouldn't necessarily be having sex at that age, being exposed and seeing bodies. But first of all, seeing bodies isn't necessarily sexual. Doesn't have to be, right? And so, but it is in this country. And so, what do we do with that? I don't have the answer. But I'm bringing it up to you right now to say these are the problems that are embedded in our system, and how we're dealing with it, how we're approaching it is still kind of Band-Aid-ish, right? And so when we prioritize, in Oakland, my son's middle school, they had a whole committee. They had parents involved and school officials, and they drafted it and redrafted it. And it was a really contentious thing because you have parents on all sides participating in the dress code. So that part was good, that you had this multidisciplinary involvement in a school policy. But again, the girls, in my opinion, we're getting undue pressure and burden of the dress code. The boys wasn't, right? So one of the things we do in mental health is we take deep breaths. So if you do one with me, we just breathe in. That's one. These are called cleansing breaths. And then do another one. In through the nose, out through the mouth. A little bit longer this time. In. I didn't invent that, and of course you could count to 10 for anger management, but it's still effective, right? It works. Take a deep breath. I just said something hard. Take a deep breath. You just said something difficult. Take a deep breath. Allow yourself to settle, right, as we move through these difficult ideas. So, cultural humility allows us to say, again, I don't like just talking about trauma and how it affects the brain and how bad things are and how parents and decisions and this and that, because those don't lead us to the questions. Those give us the illusion that we have the answers, right? So we want to get to the questions that allow us to retrain our own brains, because at the end of the day, I can't do nothing for y'all. All I can do is retrain my brain every chance I get when I see a pattern that's not useful or helpful as a member of my community, right? And we're all imperfect. But with cultural humility, it takes us to a place where we want to take full responsibility. So cultural competence really quickly was something that cropped up in the 80s, and it gets a lot of criticism now as, you know, really being about how to train white people to not be racist to people of color. So it was limited in scope, and it was brand new. We got to remember, when cultural competence came out in the 80s, no one was looking at public health data saying, I wonder if this is impacted by racial disparities. And they weren't asking that, right? The epidemiologists weren't asking that. The researchers weren't looking at that. And so we were glad to have cultural competence come up as something that allowed us to say, we have to look at culture too. We have to look at race, and we have to look at our population level data and look at trends according to race and gender. That's how but that wasn't anything new, but that was something with cultural competence that allowed us to say, we have to make sure that all of the adults that are in our systems have this lens. Cultural humility allows everyone to recognize and acknowledge their blind spots. So we have literal blind spots. There's this book called Blind Spot that you actually, the book has 3 dots and they're like, cover your eye, and a dot disappears. It's like literal blind spots in your eyes, in your optical vision. So we certainly have cognitive blind spots. And so cultural humility allows all of us to recognize and acknowledge we have blind spots, and gives us a process for exploring those blind spots on an ongoing basis. So cultural humility, I do 4-hour trainings on it. I'm going to do this for 5 minutes. So critical self-reflection and lifelong learning. I wish I could go back to school. I really do. I don't want any more debt, so I'm not. But I love learning. But it's not necessarily in a formal setting. If you love reading, if you love just information, if you love learning about new things, exploring new things, that makes you a better person. You don't have to go climbing mountains, right? You can just really be into learning just as a person, right? That's why when you get your degree and when you get licensed and all this stuff, they require you, when you're licensed, to go back and get retrained and retrained and retrained, because the information is always being updated, always being changed. There's always new information, right? So when you get to that level of understanding the issues, you are constantly correcting inaccurate information. So you take the best of what we know about trauma. You take the best of what we know about education, and it's flawed. That set of knowledge is flawed. Right? Does anybody else agree? Do we have flaws in our systems of government? I came this close to asking my TSA brothers and sisters, are y'all getting paid? But I didn't. I was like, I'm not. They might not be ready for that joke. So critical self-reflection, lifelong learning. If you don't have that, it's a non-starter. Right? Because you are not asking questions. You feel like you have the answers, right? And you're not going to grow from that point. So recognize and challenge the power imbalance. So what is that? Does anybody want to venture and try to articulate that? Or because I struggled with it, because when you are a counselor or a therapist, right, there's a power differential, yeah, right? Especially when we're talking about in this setting, right? We're dealing with children, you're an adult. Boom, that's a power differential. You're a trained, paid professional in the building, and they're a student. That's a second layer of power differential. And chances are, if you're talking to them, they did something wrong or they have a problem. Boom, that's the third layer, trifecta. You are the almighty powerful one. Do you feel that way? That's the funny part. You feel powerless in that interaction, don't you? Be honest. I'm talking about the difficult ones, right? You feel powerless, but you have 3 levels of power over the situation. And so recognize that. And then recognize the difference between the appropriate power balance and the power imbalance. So the appropriate power balance is you greet them, they come in, you contain them, you hold them, and you take them through a process. That is appropriate. That is expected. That's what you're supposed to do. That's what you're here to do. Power imbalance is that extra stuff. What's the extra stuff? What's that?
Just dictating what they need to do.
Right. Just not being nice about it. Dictating what they want to do, not asking their input, not checking in on you, not listening. Oh, that's a big one. Listening. God. You know, we're supposed to listen all the time, not just half the time, you know. When people start talking to you, you're just like, right. So listening is a huge way to challenge the power imbalance. That alone, like really listen, not what did you do or what's going on, and then you wait till they finish talking before you, okay, well, we're gonna go and we're gonna do this. You didn't listen. You didn't even listen to the answer that they gave, right? It was perfunctory. It was like, okay, but if you actually listen, then you can actually hear what they're going through. And then it wouldn't take more than 2 to 4 words of acknowledgement for what you just listened to establish a sense of safety and security for that child. Listening to a child for 1 minute will settle them and increase their sense of calm, reduce their anxiety. It's amazing. Taking deep breaths with the kids, they don't want to do that when they first walk in. But if you listen to them and you give those 4 words of, oh, okay, so it must be really hard to feel like nobody's listening to you or nobody's really, you know, helping you out, or, right? Boom, they're like, oh. They can just like put their guard down just a little bit, right? Because before you demonstrated that you listened to them, they're like, fight or flight, fight or flight, fight or flight, fight or flight. Am I gonna get in trouble? What's gonna happen? What am I gonna do? Oh, I get it. This is what you're going. We're not even, oh, there still might be a consequence, there still might, but just as a human being, right? To connect with them helps them. And that is recognizing and challenging the power imbalance. And then when you get to the point where you're making team decisions, right? Just like in our personal life, in our professional life, there's some people that we like and there's some people we don't like as much. And there's some people that we will advocate for. And there's some times where we will not advocate. You know, this has been a problem for them all year long. I don't know if we keep giving them chance, right? I'm not saying you're wrong when you do that. I'm just saying recognize it. And then the last one is institutional accountability. That's what this is right here, institutional accountability. I like to say institutional accountability, we know the low-hanging fruit is who? The superintendent, the school board, right? When we talk about accountability, no? Yeah, we're talking about the leaders. But who else are we talking about? We're talking about you. Because according to the kid. How many of the kids have met the superintendent? Well, maybe a bunch. But you are who they see as the school district, as the school, as the adult, as the institution. It's you. And so when we talk about institutional accountability, it connects to that other I word, integrity, right? It's not what you do while everybody's looking, it's what you do when nobody's looking, right? And so that's the institutional accountability piece where we're holding people at the top accountable and we're holding people on direct service accountable equally. And the other piece about institutional accountability is it's a recognition and an understanding that the institution plays a significant role in the individual's life. And we constantly have to look at and find ways to improve the institution, right? And so I said, what are the problems? Boom! Avalanche of answers. Okay, what are the solutions? What are the effective interventions? Let's do that. Let's do that. I feel like we should shift the energy. So in 3 minutes or less, go around your table, and everybody doesn't have to share, but somebody who has a recent, maybe in the last week or month, a really successful story, a really successful intervention with a student or with a teacher or with a classroom. All right? Let's talk about, let's pump ourselves up. Successful interventions, meaning not necessarily there weren't any tears or any consequences, but that you felt that as the adult, you were able to connect with that young person and make them whole, at least for that situation. Any questions? All right, successful interventions, go. It's your time to shine. Categorically, I was walking around, I was listening to some of the stories, and I mean, folks just really get into it. So this is the fun part. What were some of the successes that we could celebrate? Effective, positive.
Giving opportunities for leadership.
What else?
We're doing daily circles in a classroom that have a lot of behavior issues.
Circles are good. It's really good to deal with behavior stuff as a group in the class because, right, when you just single out a kid and send them out, it traumatizes the other kids because they're like, oh, that's going to happen to me if I'm out of line.
And the teacher knew I was going to be gone today, and even though she's complaining about the circles, she was telling me yesterday, I think we'll do blah, blah, blah for our questions tomorrow, like without me saying anything.
See, that's the good part about how we get stuck in these negative patterns is when you introduce a new pattern, then they get stuck in that new positive pattern. So kudos, yes.
Celebrating successes.
Even if they're very small.
We are called when something went wrong, but not often do we take, at the end of the day on Friday and say, I just wanted to call and let you know how great so-and-so did, or how great they did this one.
I can attest. See, I'm living a parallel life. So as a parent, when I get those calls, it makes all the difference. Because I get the bad calls too, right? So absolutely, it's really easy just to call a parent and say, man, your kid really stepped up. What else? So there's a lot of ways you can celebrate success. Yes?
Allowing students a safe place to find their voice.
Yes. Well,
I think consistency. Like, I've been at this school for 7 years now, so I'm seeing kids that I had a lot of trouble with as kindergartners. Now they're getting into 5th grade, and I'm there all the time doing the same thing, so they trust me. They're coming to me now on their own, and it's paying off.
Long-term relationship building, consistency. Yep, thank you, yes. You decide.
Okay, helping students with completing their next steps after being admitted into the university.
Oh yeah, college. Yes.
So I'm working as a social worker, and one of the things I get to do is kind of go around and be on campus and talk to kids informally as well as in formal session, but I'm also using a therapy dog who comes, and it has opened so many inroads with kids who haven't been willing to come to talk to me.
Animals, yes.
Peer mentoring, where kids who dysregulated themselves for 5 years, the 5th grader can go to the kindergartner and knows how to get them to self-regulate.
So some of these are literally going against how schools are actually organized, right? It's by batches, by date of arrival, right? And that's how we move people through the system. And we're talking about interventions that say, hey, you know what? Maybe these older kids have something to offer these younger kids. And you know what the younger kids do to the older kids? They inspire maturity, right? Because now they're like, I have to take care of you. And you're not my little brother or sister, so I don't hate you. So I'm going to actually be nice to you. Maybe that's just in my house. Okay. So we have to break down how we've actually structured and organized the system for efficiency to bring it right. Because still, at the end of the day, the fact that we're all here like this is efficiency purposes. Okay, we're going to bring Dr. Payne, and we're going to pack the room, and we're going to videotape it, and it's all good. It's what we have to do, right? We're trying to maximize our resources. But there are ways, in animals, I love that suggestion, because how many teachers have a fish or a turtle or a snake or a pet? And it's a big deal if an animal dies too, because that happens. But then they learn about death and mourning and grief and all of that too. So it's beautiful. These are wonderful interventions, right? So I want to give you all a break. And I want to warn you that I will start promptly at the end of the break. And so it is 9:35. If you are back at 10:45, excuse me, woo! They're like, I'm going to go to the movies. I'm going to go finish folding clothes. Okay, no. 10-minute break, folks, 10 minutes. So I started doing this training, not this training, but a training at the organization I told you about, Lincoln Mental Health Organization. And we were working with disabled young people, categorized and classified as disabled, but really they were poor or under-resourced or just black. And we, the organization said, well, Michelle, maybe you could do a training on where these kids come from. Maybe talk about their environment, right? Because at the time, the focus was on the children alone and their behavior, right? And their history of bad behavior. And it was like, well, maybe you could do a training for our clinicians and for our team around where does this behavior come from, right? What is the trauma in their neighborhoods? And also, a lot of folks came to me during the break as well to further debrief the neighborhood conversation. That the point, and I don't think I debriefed that necessarily as tightly as I could have, but that ultimately the message, right, is that I set you up by putting the word good and bad. They're just neighborhoods with people in them. Right? And that the important piece to remember is that the neighborhoods are where people are trying to survive and live their lives, right? And so you have people came up to me and were telling me stories of how they lived in a bad neighborhood, but the quote unquote bad people were chasing bad people away and protecting, looking out for their neighbors basically, right? And so that training that I did led me to then do cultural humility and then to integrate these concepts around environment and community and how environment and community shapes all of the things we're trying to deal with in schools with young people. And it's an important lens because as much as we all understand and no one's completely challenged me on the systems lens, right? At least verbally, maybe in your head, but that, right, when we're looking at changing these things, we have to start with the system and figure out how we can tweak the system, because then once the system is upgraded and improved, then the positivity will flow from there. And so the social determinants of health is a concept that is illustrated beautifully in an 8-hour documentary called Unnatural Causes. How many of you are familiar with that documentary? Oh boy, it is awesome. It's a documentary that basically talks about it talks about so much, but it talks about this, right? The conditions in which people are born, grow, live, work, and age determine their health outcomes. So is this something new? No. Who I forget, was it Plato or Aristotle? One of them said, you tell me where a man lives or is born, and I'll tell you how he's gonna die, right? So basically the same thing, right? Destiny by zip code. You all familiar with that? Yeah. Right. So when we're looking at population level data, you divide it up by zip code, and each zip code has a set of demographics and outcomes for the people that live in that zip code. And typically you have in Oakland, the Hills zip codes. The kids in those Hill public schools, they did a report that said those kids live 10 years longer than kids in West Oakland, where West Oakland is surrounded by the port of Oakland. So what does that mean? Thousands of diesel trucks daily, environmental hazard. Oh, next to the Army base. That, by the way, you guys see the new budget. They eliminated the Superfund cleanup fund for cleaning up where the U.S. military has left hazardous materials in the ground where people live, men, women, and children. So social determinants of health is a big deal, and it leads us to the conclusion when we're here doing this work hand to hand with the young people, with the families, and with the schools, that why are we treating people without changing what makes them sick? That's my favorite question. So what's making them sick? Environmental factors. Thank you. Somebody pay attention. Lack of privilege that indicates how you're going to move in a certain environment. And so with the social determinants of health, here's where we come in, right? The social determinants of health shape the distribution of money. We know that, right? So you guys have initiatives. Is there any bond initiatives? Supporting the schools, supporting building. Is there anything happening right now? TUSD? No?
We don't do that.
You said we don't do that. Oh, what about, I don't even want to incite a riot, but teacher raises? Right, we don't do that either. Okay, so that's the circumstance, right? It's not some mystical environmental factor. We're talking about the TUSD budget. That's the environmental factor, number one, that impacts you. Number one, because when you're the superintendent and the superintendent goes talk to CFO, CFO's got one job, meet payroll, no matter what, right? So these are some of the circumstances we're dealing with. So the money, the power, right? That's the hierarchy. And the power is interesting because, you can look, you can look at our president, right? You have positions that you could have power and influence or not, right? We have a system that will keep going regardless. If you're a leader or not, the system's going to keep going, right? So the power that we see is not necessarily what we need to be looking towards to make the changes, right? Because I saw a clip of Obama talk about sort of his experience as a community organizer and saying, oh man, this council member, this alderman, right? And you guys have council members for Tucson? Oh, we're trying to get a bond to build a park. Oh, this council member's a knucklehead. I'm gonna go to the mayor. I'm gonna go to the state legislator. And he said, get to the state legislator. He's like, these bozos, oh man, they're just as bad as that alderman. And then he said, okay, well, I'm gonna go to the U.S. Senate. And he's like, oh, it gets worse. Right? And then the presidency and so on. And, he's sitting in meetings with, 15 people in charge of the 15 most resourced and powerful nations. And he's like, oh my God. They're just regular people. Right? So when we're talking about power and the power structure, I think as a populace, we put a little bit too much faith in our leadership to do the right thing or to make things happen, not because we actually believe in them, but because we feel disempowered, right? As a group and as individuals. And so then we look to resources. So in my community, we don't have a whole lot of money. We don't have a whole heck of a lot of power. And so we focus on the resources and we try to tap into the resources. And since becoming the CEO of Youth Uprising, I have made a concerted effort to bring resources in the building without paying for them, right? So finding organizations and programs and projects that are already funded. But we have this big, beautiful building and we have a staff, a core staff and team that can work with them. And so I'm focusing on bringing in the resources that will help the young people. Because if I immediately depend on a big pot of money from somebody down at the city or whatever, all I got to do is piss off their chief of staff. And that money is gone. I know for a fact. Okay. So, so these are policy decisions. So, again, when we talk about policy decisions, we take shots at all of the leaders I just talked about. But we are policy. How many of you have been to cost team meetings or attendance review, or what are the different meetings you go to besides this training, this super fun training on Friday, right? What are the meetings that you go? Do you guys have leadership meetings? MTSS, discipline, the alphabet soup, right? And what do? You drag yourself to that meeting like, okay. We're going to talk about the same problems over and over again. And it's not fun, but every once in a while, if you pay attention, not necessarily every meeting, but in those meetings, especially leadership meeting, on the agenda, there might be an opportunity to come up with a policy. Anybody been in one of those meetings? Where you're trying to come up with a rule. I'll use that word, a rule. Anybody in meetings where you make up rules? One person. One person. Two. I get three. I get two, I get three, and four. We got four. All right. So these are the opportunities to affect policy, right? When we use the word policy, it's a big word. We're talking about, the Affordable Health Care Act or the wall or, it's big stuff. We're talking policy. No, policies are rules that you make in these meetings with the other leaders that are going to implement the rules. That's policy. And engaging in your institution, taking institutional accountability, engaging in those meetings. I don't like these meetings because the adults are stupid. I just want to work with the kids and da-da-da-da. Man, come on, let's grow up. Because that was me. So I was like, I got to grow up, right? So when you're in these meetings, get that extra shot of coffee because that's your job too. That's part of your job is engaging. Yes, you're beleaguered. You may have issues with a couple other people on the team and the comments and where they're coming from. Get past that as quick as you can. And engage in those meetings with this in mind. I'm going to make a rule that's not going to be so that we can finish this meeting on time, but so that we can set a rule or a policy that's going to improve our young people. And that's an often underutilized opportunity that those of us, that if you're not in the director position, that you're like, I don't want to engage, right? Whereas, here's a secret. If you really want to know what your leaders think, they think that the best decisions they can make are decisions that you all support. Isn't that obvious? No? Right? So how many times do your leaders make decisions that you don't support? Does that ever happen? Yeah, heck yeah, it happens. Absolutely. Yes. Wait. I'm going to. I got to do my job, man.
I think one of the biggest problems for me in TUSD is when we're at the site level and we see something that we need to correct and we go to correct it, that our leadership doesn't support that correction. And that for me, I don't need that. I don't. Can you hear me in the back?
No.
All right. I will use this and I will talk loud. So that's for me is the problem I see is like when I, at my site, make a decision that I know will benefit my students and I get no support from my district or their rule on that issue is different and they don't understand why we're doing it the way we're doing it. And that is, I see, the biggest problem for us. I see this and I can relate to this, but when I go, okay, well, this is why we need to help this student with this attendance issue, and I contact somebody and say, you know what, outside of the people at my site, there's no one else to talk to that parent about the importance of their child attending school on a regular basis and what resources we can offer that parent to make that happen. Because there's no one at 1010 that I can go, you know what, we've had that conversation. I had a parent that can bring their kid to school every day late, 20 minutes. Because for her, she's got to get to work and it's easier for her to do that late than it is for her to have a kid there on time. And so what do I do with that? And there is no policy that says we can do this.
Well, and so if there's no policy that says you can do that, then you call for a meeting. But you don't just call a meeting, you got to print an agenda. That makes it official. And you put on there, you say, let's discuss, alternatives, right? Because there's always somebody smart enough in this. We've got some smart people in here. Oh, well, we can do the prep period and then the lunch and then after school and then they'll do the homework on Saturday. It's Ed Code, right? You just go to the state Ed Code and you figure it out, right? And then you run it up the line. You tell Jimmy, you tell somebody that goes straight to the district and says, let's roll it out this way, right? And so it's not easy, right? It's not difficult. So the example you gave is a perfect example of how you don't treat every student exactly the same. That's not fairness. Ain't nothing fair about that. That's the most unfair thing you could do. That's exactly how disparities flourish. Exactly. Well, here's the application. It's $55. You got to submit it online by 5 o'clock on the... I don't have a problem with guidelines and rules and all of that. But when the system is completely inflexible and our families are all kinds of differently resourced, right? Differently prepared. I mean, I don't know any other way how to say it, right? If we're talking about them as individual families, well, guess what? We have to respond to them as individual families. And sometimes it might be a workaround for the parent, right? It might be a conversation where the parent needs to understand, well, maybe you have some other options, right? But once you get into the situation, you can actually ascertain that. And so what we're going to transition to the language piece I talked about. And so there's a thing that goes on in our schools where you got the in-school suspension room, right? How many schools have that? You call it something else. I don't know, the intervention, ISI. What's that? What's the acronym for? In-school intervention. Ours was in-school suspension. I guess they took out the suspension, put intervention, right? Sounds a lot better. Okay. And so what happens is you have a teacher sends a kid to the ISI room, and they send the kid that causes them problems every day, and they're like, finally, I'm done. And then that kid's out the room, and then what happens in that classroom? Another kid pops up. Now I can be a joker, right? And so it's a cyclical cycle, and what happens is these kids don't actually fit squarely into any label, right? They can fit into a label for a certain behavior, for a certain day, for a certain period of time, in a certain class, with a certain teacher, when they're in class with certain friends, They could be in all of these, right? But not categorically, that's not who they are. And so I was doing the suspension work, and the problem is when you're looking into problems, there's a lot of them. And when you're doing work that's designed to talk about these problems, it's a weird kind of excitement. It's like, oh yeah, right? Because you're learning about things that were previously not understood and not seen, and assumed that, well, I just didn't do a good job, right? And so when we talk about our students that aren't performing and living up to our expectations, we typically talk about them in three categories. We talk about their capacity to learn. And we do it in a way by saying, oh, they don't value education, right? You dropping your child off 20 minutes late every day, you don't value your child's education, right? The consideration to that judgment, maybe they're rejecting a substandard education for their child. It's a great education for the other kids in the class, but for that kid, for whatever reason, it's substandard. Not always, but sometimes that's the case, right? Or we say, oh, they can't perform in this academic environment, or they're unlikely to succeed, right? Cringe, right? When you say these things, but do educators say this? Do counselors say this? Do social workers say this from time to time, right? It's said by adults. It's said other parents will call out other kids, right? They'll come into the school. You got to do this because these kids are da-da-da-da-da, right? And we have other considerations. The learning environment disadvantages them. It disadvantages the girls. It disadvantages the hyperactive boys. It disadvantages the super inquisitive kids. It disadvantages a lot of kids by behavior. And that there's also consideration of lack of caring adults in their environment, right? And not that y'all don't care, but if they're experiencing you that way, for whatever reason, then that's their experience, right? And so the negative learner identity is the first stage, right? And so when I would go into schools and talk to teachers and do work with them, they would say, well, I'm not a social worker. I'm like, well, yes, you are. Because you are responsible for social emotional learning of all of these kids. And you're also, as a part of your job, teaching, supposed to work with the parents. That's social work, right? And you're supposed to be in contact. Social work all up and down. So when we're talking about negative learner identity, what's the solution? What's the antidote? What's the option? Is to establish, and you all have these, I saw these initiatives in some of the schools where you really establish, catch them doing good, catch them being good students, right? One of the first things I learned in that non-public school environment is you will drive yourself crazy going from one kid to the next, to the next, to the next, saying, stop that, put that down, get your book out, do this, do that. And it drove me crazy. And then one day I said, oh, I'm going to go to the one person that's not acting up. And I'm going to thank them. Thank you for paying attention and keeping eye contact. And then the other kids that are acting up are like, what's he doing? What? Who did? Right? And then I go to that kid and say, oh, thank you for getting it together. It was like magic. It was like magic. So making sure everyone sees themselves as a learner, that's our job, right? So if the teacher didn't do a good job, as a counselor or as a social worker, what are some ways you can draw out for that student? First of all, your job is to receive them emotionally, right? As a counselor and as a social worker, but also receive them as a learner. Receive them as a learner, right? That is their number one job when they come in. They're coming in for some behavior thing. Ask them, okay, well, what did you learn? What are you learning? That was also the number one intervention for disproportionate suspension. When I would talk to parents of kids who were getting suspended, I would say, well, these are the questions you got to ask the teacher. These are the questions you got to ask the principal, right? Around what are the expectations and why a 3-day suspension and why a 5? How many other 3-day suspensions were handed out this year or last year for this category of behavior? Oh, tough questions indeed. But ultimately asking them and then saying, well, the first question you ask your teacher, this is what I tell parents, the first question you ask your teacher or your administrator, if you're brought up to school for whatever issue, is ask them, well, how's my child doing academically? Well, it can't sit still. No. I didn't ask you about his behavior. How's my child doing with math? Well, you know, he doesn't really focus. Okay. I didn't ask you how well he focuses. What are you teaching this week, and where is my child with understanding fractions? That's the conversation I have with my children's teachers when my child has a behavioral challenge. Oh, and at the end of the conversation, we address the behavior stuff too. But the first thing I want the teacher to engage with me with is my child as a learner. And that's what we can do as counselors, and that's what we can do as social workers, because it is a school, and it is about learning. And it is traditional, and you know, we do our best. We bring in animals, we've got windows. Now I've seen classrooms in some of your elementary, middle schools where they have like desks where kids can stand up, and like chair, beanbag, like really creative stuff that allows kids to learn. But the bottom line is you label them as a learner. If you're gonna put any stereotype or label on them, you're a learner, college bound, if you choose. So then there's a negative behavior. That's what we're most used to, right? Emotional regulation deficit, right? So how many of you have heard an adult say, some of these kids, they just don't want to learn. They just don't know how to act. No? No one's ever heard that? Oh, they're just so violent. They're just so violent, right? They're explosive, right? Now, when we're talking about behavior, we are talking about what we're seeing in our schools is a reflection of the legacy of violence in this country. We have a very deep, strong history and legacy of violence in this country. Violence against children, violence against oppressed people. And so the students don't know how to act. Well, you know what? How safe have they ever been in these institutions? Brown versus Board, right? You all know what happened in 1954 with desegregation in the United States schools, American school system, was they found out at the Supreme Court level that black students were being harmed simply by existing in America. That was really ultimately what it was, because they researched black girls in South Carolina in segregated schools in the 30s and then again in the 40s, and also girls in New York in integrated schools. And it was a doll test where they had to pick two identical dolls, black doll, white doll. Which doll is the good doll? Which doll looks like you? Which doll do you want to play with? And these black children were habitually picking the white doll for the doll that they like, that's pretty, that's nice, that they want to play with, and not the black doll. And so that was an experiment that was presented that was the foundation for Brown versus Board. And the reason why I told you all of that is because if you knew that, then what would be your response? Would your response be, okay, since black children are experiencing harm in educational settings that are integrated as well as segregated, we've proven that racism exists in integrated schools as well as segregated schools. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna send we're gonna desegregate all of these schools, and you all have seen the pictures, right? Of the angry adults yelling at the little girl in a dress and pigtails walking into school with National Guard. We've all seen the images, I hope, right? That was the worst intervention ever. Why? Why am I saying that? Somebody. They ain't moving. Thank you, Jimmy.
It was the worst intervention ever, because then they closed all the black schools and all the black teachers lost their jobs.
Boom!
And they didn't have anyone to look up to when they went to the white schools.
What's your name?
Julia McGee.
Thank you, Julia. All right. Clap it up for Julia. So when that happened, you had the largest number of black female superintendents, right? Because you got the county system and then you have your city districts, right? But the county school office has jurisdiction over the individual school districts. And so in the South, where everything was segregated, all of those districts and all of those schools were led by black women. And you had the highest number of black women principals and superintendents ever in the history of America during that time, and it's never recovered. And so we're always focused on the where's it going, but what was left, right? And so that is part of the violence that was perpetuated against students because, right, Boston, you know how bad it was with busing? Busing was bad for black kids. Sometimes it was bad for everybody. It was just all the way around a bad intervention, right? But it's what we got, and it's what we're still recovering from today, okay? So when we're talking about the violence in schools, we frequently want to focus on the students as the dangerous ones. And until we start talking about justification for having officers on site or on campus, then we're talking about, well, it's to protect the school from outside threats and safety. Really? Well, how many arrests did they make of outside individuals versus how many tickets and arrests did they make of students inside the school? That alone should say, okay, well, they need to go. Unless we truly believe that a building full of adults need a cop to keep them safe from the students that they're mandated to build relationship with. So if I see that, I'm like, y'all don't trust me, y'all are scared of me, I don't feel safe. When you're afraid of a kid, when you don't trust a kid, they feel unsafe. I'm not saying they need to be trustworthy, they might be lying to you, right? But when you don't believe in them, when you don't believe them, they don't feel safe. Because they're like, well, now what am I gonna do? They don't believe me, right? So that leads to a sense of lack of safety, which is the other end of violence, right? So they're actually victims of violent institutions. Violent change, right? Violent disparities. That's violent. Kids have been murdered while being suspended because they're out of school and on the block. They learn through punishment. Okay, breathe in. So I come from the mental health profession where the American Psychological Association, which was founded a long time ago, one of their first diagnoses was called drapetomania. Drapetomania, which is a diagnosis that it afflicted slaves. This was in the 1800s. And the affliction was, drapetomania was a disorder. The psychologist said the symptoms are African slaves that had the desire to run away. So when they would run away, they would say, oh, clearly something's wrong with this one. So the intervention for drapetomania was, anyone? Beat them, right? So is that violent? Yeah, no, yeah, that's pretty violent. So that was a concept that we still hold on to today and apply to all of our students, which is our children learn through punishment. Not through engagement and rewards. And right, what's the biggest gripe of a teacher when a student gets plucked by a counselor for a session and then they come back, right? Or it's an intervention, right? They're acting up, they need some space. Oh, okay, we'll take them away. They come back smiling with a lollipop. Oh man, the teachers get pissed, right? They want to see punishment. They want to see that child sad and hurt and lacking incentives and my youngest son, I've told every single teacher that's tried this, I'm keeping them in for recess and lunch. I don't make too big of a stink. I'm like, but you're making your job harder because my kid needs to run around, needs to run his mouth, like father, like son. He needs to do that. And so if he's doing that in the classroom and you keep him in the class because he did that, well, you're just revving him up for more of that after the break, right? So you can, stop limiting the kids from moving. They're already in a freaking building all day, every day. They're sitting in a class, sitting in a chair, right? That's violent. It is. All right. And then the negative moral identity. This is actually the most painful because it speaks to your default nature, right? When you assume that your default nature is to be deviant, right? So black boys are typically seen as sexually deviant. It's the other side of the sexuality debate and dress code and all of that, right? Study after study after study after study. Black kids versus white kids. Oh, there was a study that looked at sentencing for white people only. White males that had more African features, darker skinned white males with wider nose and bigger lips got longer sentences, apples to apples. Same prior, same robbery charge, same this, same that. These are white males in the criminal justice system getting disproportionately longer sentences for looking less European. If I could make this up, I'd be making way more money doing something else. These are facts. So the negative moral identity, speaking to a spiritual deficiency, I'm not going to get too deep and start talking about Christianity and stuff like that. I'm just going to say that when we're talking about a person's morals and values, we need to recognize and respect the cultures of the people that come into our realm. And we need to respect that we are not the judge of anybody's morals but our own. Never, not ever are you the judge of somebody else's morals because you don't know what they're dealing with, right? And we definitely can see today in 2019 that our institutions lack a moral compass. Come on, y'all. It's just a bunch of documents. This whole thing is we're all operating off a bunch of documents. So it really is up to us. And so if we see what we see, we can't say, oh, what can we do? It's the rule. It's the federal shutdown. You can't pay them. That's hella dumb. I mean, you can't get more ignorant than, I mean, does anybody else feel me? Like it's 350 million of us. And we're being held hostage by 300 people. Anyway, so the criminals, let's talk about that, right? So some of y'all might be tired of this, but we got to say it. We got to say it, right? It is a crime to be a black man in the United States of America. Oh, come on. Here we go. No. It was literally a crime to be a black man and be amongst other black men and not be employed and not have a letter. This is 1910, 1920s, and 1930s. It was a crime to be a black man and to be out in public and not be working for a white man. Am I making this up? No, it was a crime. And what they would do is they would say, oh, what are you doing? You got a job? What are you doing at the store? You got a letter? You doing something for, oh, no? Okay, we're going to take you and put you in jail. All right. Well, it's not really a crime we can convict you for because it's BS. But you have to pay for your 3 days in jail. Oh, you have no money. Oh, well, and then boom, that was the labor force, right? So what we see now with Verizon and Victoria's Secrets making billions of dollars, Amazon, through the prisons, slavery in 2019. So it was a crime to be black. And so has that changed? Maybe the enforcement, maybe the piece of paper has changed, but we haven't got rid of that notion, right? And what is my evidence of that? The innocent till proven guilty versus guilty, just guilty. Guilty because of who you are, right? Is what we're seeing over and over and over and over again in these different situations. And you have to recognize and understand the different ways different groups are treated unfairly. We got a comment in the back, and I am moving.
Could you just explain how the prisons help those companies?
Okay, so right now, there were efforts to, so companies can, first of all, there's privatization of prisons, so it's not even the government running the prisons. They're just following some guidelines and getting money from the federal government to incarcerate people. But basically, it's always been, prisons have always been an industry for businesses. So going back to the you know, after slavery was abolished and you had all of these companies in the South that, you know, a farm or a plantation owner, you've seen the pictures, right? They go to the sheriff and they say, Sheriff, I need about, excuse my French, I need about 20 for my cotton farm. And so they would go out and get 20 black men. You're arrested. Oh, you can't pay it off? Well, now you're going to work in this chain gang. You're going to work it off. And that was literally the business agreement between the sheriff and the company. So today, you have the exact same agreement. Federal government allows, and individual states allow all manner of companies and corporations to cut a deal with the prison to have the prisoners work for the companies. And the prisoners are excited at the job because they're in prison and they don't have any other options. So if I can make $1.80 or $10 a day working for 5 hours, you know, I'm gonna take it. And so that is what we have today. We have companies are able to, oh, even outside of prison, restaurant workers, did you know? All except, I think, a handful of states have a law. I just learned this last month. Have a law that allow states to pay, it bypasses the minimum wage, allows states to pay restaurant workers $2 because, and tipping. So tipping literally came from slavery where they said, okay, we're going to pass a law to allow to not pay restaurant workers anything and they will make their living off of their tips. As long as their tips meet what salary I would have paid them, then they're just going to get it from tips. Right? And so still today you have laws in many of the states that allow businesses to pay their restaurant workers $2 an hour because they get tips. That's wrong. And that's unfair. And it's an institutional problem. And it's a result of policies and power and money and resources over decades. Why am I talking about this? Y'all are in schools, right? But this is where this comes from. This is where the mentality comes from. Breathe in. So, what can we do differently? Okay? So we already talked about the learner identity, right? And so the first person that needs a learner identity is you, right? That's cultural humility, lifelong learning, critical self-reflection. I skipped over the critical self-reflection part. How many of you are exceptionally good at critical self-reflection? Okay. All right, next question. I see every hand go up. How many of you are good at critical other reflection? You can critically reflect on other people all day long. Oh, this person, this person, this person, this person, this person. But how many times do you say, oh, I should have, I could have, I need to, I gotta, right? And not to beat yourself up, but to have a constant reflection process at least when you get the actual feedback, right? We can critically reflect on interactions and our behaviors and how we handled stuff just on our own. But especially when somebody says, hey, when you did this, this is how it impacted me. And I didn't appreciate it, or that was messed up, or whatever. And I was justified, you were in the wrong, and and I had to deal with this, and I had to deal with that. And that's cool in the moment to get defensive, right, and push back. But the self-reflection, right, the word literally means to look at it from a different angle, at a different time, in a different space, right? What you all know and experience is the same thing that the young people experience. You're not always at your best in the moment because you're a human having emotions and experiences that are connected to a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't have anything to do with that child or that situation in that moment. But you are modeling a process of, and it's okay to even talk out loud, right? You know what? I'm really having a hard time figuring out how to work this situation, or you know, I'm listening to you and I want to hear, right? Talk about your confusion as a way to connect, as a way to get them to do more reflection and more talking. And so having a sense of self and a learner identity is a really good thing to start with for yourself as well as with the young people, you're talking to, right? I always talk to my team about if they come to me with a problem, I'll say one thing, I'll say another. And if a staff just, hurdles over the 3 suggestions I make, I'll stop at 3 and I'll say, well, what do you suggest? Because clearly that's what they're coming to or coming for, right? We do it all the time. You don't want to go to your boss and say, this is what you need to do. I've noticed that such and such has been happening, and you need to do this with that staff. No, that's not going to go over well. So we say, hey, we're having this issue, and I don't know what to do. Oh, well, you try this. Well, da-da-da-da-da. Whoa, you try it. Well, da-da-da. Oh, well, what do you suggest? Well, maybe we could do da-da-da. Has anybody ever experienced that?
What I find is, this is great, but there's got to be a trust level. And what I find that there isn't a trust level in some of these administrations, and to come up to them and say, hey, I've got this idea, they don't follow through with it. And I think those who have been working in institutions like this have to realize to take care of themselves is to fight certain battles. And sometimes, believe it or not, even though you want to fight it, you have to stay back. You have to choose the right battles to fight. Because if not, you're going to get backlash, you're going to get stepped on, you're going to get blackballed, you're going to get whatever. So I think you have to be really careful about it. If you've got a great team where there is the trust and like I said, if there's a lot of dysfunction, which is not sharing, not feeling, not talking, well, we've got a lot of those up there. So what does that mean? Dysfunctional. So we have to be careful. To take care of ourselves. So yes, it is great, and I self-criticize myself often, but I have to go and just go to others who I trust and say, this is how I feel, and that's about as far as I try to go. I don't want to cause anymore.
And that's totally legit. And so if you do have that relationship and you have been in that school for a year or more or whatever, then you do take that risk if you feel you have that connection. And if the supervisor or the boss signals they're right, you got a sense that they're open, right, in that sense. And so that is a really critical piece, but it is something that, but here's what you don't want to do, okay, because you can also put yourself in their shoes. You can put yourself in their shoes just for a minute and say, oh, I know they're dealing with a lot. And as far as the critical self-reflection, not so much critical beating yourself up. What was the word you used? Critical.
I'm not beating myself up. I'm just recognizing that, hey, there's some things I can control and let God take care of the rest, or something. I just can't do it all. And somebody else maybe can. Maybe I'm out of energy, or there's no immediate, how can I say, resources at this time. I just may throw it around and say, geez, I wish I could do this, but I just can't right now. I'm not able to fight that battle.
So, and that's what I want to get to the heart of, if I have your permission. Sure. Okay. So the difference that I want to point out between the two in terms of like, because I can beat myself up too. And the difference is when you beat yourself up, you're saying, here's a problem, can't go much further with it, and I don't have the capacity to deal with it or figure out another solution. Critical self-reflection, you assume that you have the resources and the capacity to address the situation. Maybe not fix it, maybe not immediate, right? It may take time, it may involve other people, but you at least feel that you, with the support and cooperation of others, can address the situation in a way that will leave somebody whole, right? So that's the difference between critical self-reflection, is you allow yourself permission. No, you create the habit of examining your own behaviors and interactions, right? Even if you were defensive in the moment, even if you were right and they were wrong, how could you have done it better? Because you can always do things better, right? Not that you should strive to be perfect, because that's a whole nother diagnosis. But you gotta believe that you can turn the needle. And again, I'm 45 years old. I've never done anything by myself or overnight. Never, not once. Right? So it takes time, but if you have because we can spend just as much time as it takes to fix a problem to stay in a problem because we feel hopeless and helpless. So that's the painstaking application, right? When we talk about suggestions that we give each other and the lack of implementation that happens, that's real, right? As an executive, you get 10% of the stuff done. The 10 things that you got in your that you could potentially do, you're gonna get, if you get half done, that's woo, you go home feeling good. Like, I got 5 things done. Right? And so we don't want to beat other people up either, right? Because that's me. So I know if you're struggling to complete the task list I've given you, I get it, right? And then the devotion to cultivation. So that's really around change, right? As your identity unfolds with the process of learning, should you stay the same? Should you keep your same stance in every position, right? Absolutely not. Your position. How many of you have an example or can testify to your position or belief on something really critical changing? I'll give you an example while folks can think. So don't feel bad about not listening to me if you're thinking of an example. I told you I did my dissertation on disproportionate suspension. The inspiration for that actually came from an experience in alternative school, where that's where you take all the kids that can't cut it in the regular schools and send them all to one place as if that's going to help them. No. And there was fights every day. There was an incident where a girl was jumped by 10 boys and they play jumped her. So it was not like really hard kicks, but I was so disgusted that as the director of the program, working with the principal, we kind of operated as a team, and he's a white male, and he said, Michelle, what are we gonna do? I said, well, she's identified the 10 boys that jumped her. We need to suspend them. I ain't thinking no circles, call in the parents, restorative justice. Well, what are these boys going through? What was happening? Where was the adult supervision? It was the system. I didn't do none of that. I was like, psh, I'm clear. There was 10 of them. We know who they are. It's only 60 kids in this school. They get suspended. Why was I thinking like that? Because I was looking at it from a gender lens, right? And so that was my cape, right? Like, oh no, that's totally unacceptable for them to abuse this girl like that. Because also you had some of the parents of the boys say, well, what does she do? Well, she's always talking ooh. So anyway, that's my example of having one position and now several years later having a completely different position. Did anybody else have an example? It doesn't have to be like that, but come on.
Well, it's similar to yours. We have a kindergartner, very, very bright, off the charts bright, who is kicks, spits, scratches the teacher, anybody that sits next to him. That immediately happens. So the teacher had decided the best way to deal with it is to keep him alone on the side of the room. Well, eventually that didn't help. So he found them anyway. And he would circle the room to try to find a weak one, and then that is the one he would begin to bully. All right, parents started complaining, and they said, this bully really is being bullied. And we're going, no. We can see a bully when we know bully when we see one. So we put him in another room because we were out of ideas. We tried everything. That teacher began to really listen to the kid, and the kids were making little sly comments. And so the last time I dealt with him, he was really dysregulated, but I found out what had happened first, and I actually gave 2 kids the same consequence, because there was a consequence. If you're not safe, you have to be away from the other kids for a while. So that changed my perception of that kid.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Everybody heard that, right? So classic, the pinching, spitting, biting, where does that come from? Does anybody know? What does that indicate typically what's going on emotionally for that child that's their go-to behaviors? Frustration, right? Frustration, which comes from, that's an emotion that comes from what? Lack of control of your environment, right? We're adults. We got a lot of control. You drove in, you're going to drive home, right? These kids, they got to ask permission to go to the bathroom, right? That's how real it is. So the frustration gets extreme when it's biting, kick, but it's lack of ability to say what's happening to them, right? Not that they don't know how to speak, but that they don't know how to address what's happening to them, to the adults, right? And so what's also happening that she illustrated is what's happening with the other kids. I can go into other stories, personal example, but what's happening in the classroom is the good kids and the, well, you know, please excuse, the kids that we typically feel like are behaving versus the kids we feel like aren't behaving, they're the same kids, right? What am I saying? Well, like when my kid gets in trouble, my principal, he's like, yeah, but he has a vocabulary. So they have a higher expectation for my son, even if the kid is cut. I'm like, yeah, dude, but he's 10. He's 10. He's 10-year-old with a whole lot of words, but he's still 10. So don't have a much higher expectation for him behaviorally if he's being attacked. So my point being, the kids also see that things aren't fair. They see things aren't fair. They're like, this human over here is deeply flawed because this kid is doing this and they don't see that. You all know, because y'all are the counselors and the social workers, so you all realize that the adults are only privy to 10% of the transgressions that happen between the students. If you're lucky, the kids know that. So they see the classroom as basically like a court of law. I'm innocent until you can prove that I did something wrong. Otherwise, it never happened, right? And so I witnessed that firsthand and also saw the dynamic of students. And they're just kids. They're just having fun. They're bored. They're teasing. They're making fun. That's what they do all the time. And sometimes they have fun with it. And sometimes it's impacting a kid that doesn't have supports and is going to, be further traumatized. And we have to recognize they're not bad kids. They're just taking advantage of the fact that as an adult, you don't see them. You don't see them as mischievous kids. You see them as the good kid, right? Because that's the brain. I've identified them. I can move on. I got other stuff to think about and focus on. That's what the brain is doing. And so any other examples where you go from one understanding to the next? Because yes, hurt kids, hurt people, right? That's the term. Not all people who sexually abuse have been sexually abused, right? We're not saying that. But we are saying that when people are being harmed as children, they're very limited in how to address that. How many times has a child under 12 been able to come up and articulate to you, I am being microaggressed by other students under their breath every time, right? They're like, he's bothering me, she's bothering me. And then when you hear that as an adult, you're like, okay, you just said absolutely nothing. Who's bothering you? How are they bothering you? Well, leave them alone. And so, and these are the shifts. And so, does anyone else want to share a shift? You got one?
When I first started counseling, my first job, I had a little girl that would come in and she always wanted to take a shower. And we had a shower at our school. So I would bring clothes. My niece was about the same size and give her clothes in their shower. And this went on for like 6 months. And I didn't see how sad she was or that there was anything else going on. It took 6 months before she finally came up to me and said, my dad is molesting me. And I didn't connect the shower or the needing to be clean and now that, I mean, if somebody were to ask me that now, I would definitely connect that. I would go, okay, there's something going on, or see the sadness and learn to look for that.
Right. And so, but that doesn't mean now everyone in this room, whenever a kid wants to take a shower, oh, they're being molested by their dad, right? That's not. But for that student, that behavior, right? So but a kid that wants to take a shower, to wonder, right? So that's the thing. Again, that was the other principle. Not have the answer, not make the assumption, but ask the question.
Yeah.
Ask the question. My first internship as a social worker, I was like doing one-on-one sessions, and lo and behold, I always used to wonder, like, how do you ask people that? How do they? And lo and behold, you ask a question, they're like, well, yeah, my dad's been, and it's like flooring. It's completely flooring that these children will tell you exactly what's happening to them if you ask them. But not a lot of people ask them. So it is the process of learning and growing and changing that is what we should expect. The process of getting new leaders and having people that care is what we should stop sending energy towards. We should stop sending energy towards that and bring that energy into our own self-reflection. How powerful is it? We got lots of examples of that one teacher that said, I'm just going to be the best teacher. Carrie Secret is her name in Oakland. Still famous, right? And stopped teaching like 30 years ago. There's another teacher, Dr. Taylor, who is on her 4th decade as an English teacher at McClymonds High School in West Oakland. She was even a principal. They broke it into small schools. She was the leader of the small school, said this is for the birds, and went back to teaching, right? So we have those examples, and those are the examples that we can really look to see how we're going to transform this educational experiment in America. All right. So, is college for everybody? Raise your hand if you have a college degree and you just said no. Oh, I know, he tricked you. Okay, so legit, yeah, college is not necessarily for everybody. But the question is, who's it for? Wait, you just said college isn't for everybody. Come on. If it's not for everybody, who's it for? Those who want it. Okay, so we expect an 18-year-old. No. Because that's way too late. When does the child who wants it have to start thinking, I'm gonna go to college? Middle school, elementary, right? Birth, right? But definitely that first algebra class, that first middle school where you got to get on the track to the requirements, right? I know. Right?
I was a child. I didn't think about college until I was an adult.
So thank you. So when we have the examples of, my favorite is, well, you know, I know somebody who's an elevator mechanic and they make, you know, $120,000. They're not hiring that many elevator mechanics. Not that many out there. It's not a durable career pathway when we're using it as an example of why everyone doesn't need to go to college, right? College is a prerequisite. If I ask this question, okay, another question. What about high school? Is high school for everybody? Yeah, you got different colleges, right? You got community college, junior college, university. So, but is high school for everybody?
Yes.
No. Who said no? Okay, tell me.
It's about the learning process and being a learner. It's about wanting to learn and being in the learning process. So if you're going to a 7-hour high school, but you're one of those people who think I can learn this, what I need to do to get out of here, or if I'm already self-motivated to learn, I'm a self-learner, then no, you don't need to go to high school. Because you can still get those things you need in life because you're one of those people who are willing to learn outside of that environment.
So are you talking about an exam? Are you Okay, so you're saying somebody could learn online and get their GED or diploma, or they could just do their own course of study and not get a diploma and be cool?
I'm saying that if they are a self-learner, I mean, think about, we set people up to say, you have to have this diploma, this graduate diploma, and to go on in life. Mm-hmm. But there are plenty of people who have said, I like learning, I enjoy learning. And I can read, I can write, I can articulate, I can express myself, I can do all those things and get what I need. Mm-hmm. And I can still be a productive member of society.
And so somebody who is graduating from the 8th grade could potentially be like, hey, you know, I'm 14, I don't need to go to high school, I'm gonna.
If that person is that person.
Because they're 14.
Does that person have the knowledge base and continue to further on their learning?
So that 14-year-old is Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci. Those are the geniuses that were self-sufficient at the age 12 because they were rich and they were exposed to all manner of experts. But when we're talking about general population, I don't think we have any disagreement that we assume everyone goes to high school, even if we have alternative ways of getting them their degree. We all feel that folks need a baseline, which is high school. What about middle school? Is middle school for everybody?
Well, it has to be in our society. We have to have a high school diploma to get both jobs.
Okay.
An entrepreneur, and sometimes that goes sideways. If, the wrong type of entrepreneur.
Right. So how many of you have heard the story over and over again, like, oh, my grandfather did all of this with a 4th grade education or with a 7th grade education? Not because they dropped out, because people weren't expected to go to high school in the 30s, in the 20s. It was until the 20s and 30s that started having compulsory high school education. So the point that I'm making, when I asked you the question, is college for everybody in 2019? And we know, I mean, I live in the Bay Area, folks. Feel bad for me because the rent in Oakland now has exceeded the rent in San Francisco because San Francisco is already impacted. And so it's bad. It's bad. So the way it's affected the environment, as we're talking about jobs and workforce, is people can't afford to live there. Therefore, you can't hire people. You can't hire people because they can't survive. So we had clinicians at Lincoln, master's level, making $46,000, which is not competitive at all. There we go. So over the last 2 years, we bumped it up to 49, close to 50. So you have clinicians roommating in apartments, right? And these are master's level folks. So who doesn't need college? Right? So that's the point. Y'all get the point, right? We say college isn't for everybody. And what that does is that allows us to acknowledge that we don't know what to do with the kids we are continually failing. That's what that is. No, college isn't for everybody because we can't fix the problems that continue to sort privileged kids to college and underprivileged kids not. So since we can't explain that, we can't fix that, we say, well, that's just how it is. That's just how it's gonna be. But I'm here to say it's a lie. It's an absolute and total lie. In 10, 15 years, there will be prerequisites far beyond college, right? What the companies have started doing, right? They're all international now. They're educating their workforce themselves. They're like, I don't care if you went to college or high school, just come in, we're gonna train you, right? My brother-in-law, he went to Georgia Tech, then he got an internship with GE. Oh, first he went to Ohio for 6 months, then they had him go to New York for 6 months. Oh, they've got their own course of education for their businesses, for their workers, and they've got the money to back it up. But here we are relying on the public system, right? So clearly that's not the resource. So the resource is our value and our belief in every single young person. And that sounds kind of Pollyannish or, sing-songy or whatever, but whose kids should be left behind? Who? Can anybody raise, well, you can leave my kid behind. I'll sacrifice my son to say he don't need to go to college because college ain't for everybody, and he could be a mechanic, and no, that's not right. That's not right. If we're in the business of educating people and we already know that machines are taking away a lot of the jobs that typically you have people graduate from high school and occupy, right? These are jobs that adults are holding were jobs that were designed for teens. Fast food jobs were designed for teenagers, not for working mothers trying to feed their family, working 3 jobs at 12 hours. I'm pretty sure choir. Okay, sorry. So I challenge us as a society, not just you, I hope I didn't offend too many people, but we need to look at what we're doing in K through 12 with college in mind. If we don't have college in mind, right? And I get it. I heard all of the problems you all were talking about. You're like, come on, it's pensioning. The parent doesn't even make them go to school. They're worried about gangs. This kid is pimping, or this kid is being pimped, or this, right? All kind of crazy stuff is happening with our children. I get it. I understand. I hear that, and I see that. And if you get old enough, I didn't look forward to being old, but unexpected byproduct was a little bit of wisdom, just a little bit, right? To be able to see patterns over time and say, wow, as a society, we need to embrace change. And we need to embrace change pretty rapidly, right? So the resistance that comes up for me when I'm thinking about certain issues, I have to challenge. And I read the room, and it is probably time for another talk and turn, and then we're going to close out. We got about another half hour, so thanks for hanging in there. So if you could turn to the person in your table and talk about 1 or 2 of the concepts that you feel need further exploration, that we've maybe scratched the surface of so far. But hey, when we talk about this, I think we really need to dig deeper into that concept. So turn and talk for 5 minutes. Okay, comments. Comments. Who's got a comment? In the back.
So one of my classes we were talking about is college for everyone, was reframing that question to, is college the right fit for that individual student as they are exiting high school, or is there a timeline that might be a better fit for them? And then also, as a room full of college-educated people, an individual's, my definition of success is probably drastically different from each student. The 500 students that I take care of at Cholla could be very different. I might have, if I were to ask each of those kids that question, my guess is I would get 500 different answers.
Thank you.
So reframing the question sometimes from a counseling perspective, I think is part of my own self-reflection.
Well, the question comes more from, and I do appreciate the dogged focus on, well, this is how we can do this. This is how nuanced the issue is. I challenge folks on it simply to say that schools are doing exactly what they were designed to do. I didn't come up with that, but a lot of scholars have said that. And what do they mean by that? Well, what do schools currently do? They sort the leaders, the managers, and the workers. It's a sorting process. That's what elementary, middle, and high school was designed to do, was to sort workers into the workforce. So of course, high schools were not designed, and colleges weren't designed for everybody to go to them. They don't even have enough seats. So I'm not actually thinking that that's our new charge. Send everybody to college. No, it's an easy way to get to those values that we have unfortunately accepted. Because it's not just for that one kid that one year. At Castlemont, we're right next to a high school that has a dismal graduation rate for black students. They've identified all the kids that are going to college and helped them apply and get accepted to college. That happened last month in terms of the applications. Then they have a group of students currently this year that they know need some support and are struggling around just graduating, right? All high schools go through this. And then they have that group of students that ain't gonna make it. They're not gonna make it. Maybe they GD, maybe they come up with a plan. So our center, Youth Uprising, what we have partnered with the school to do is to case manage those kids that are not anywhere close to graduating, to come up with a plan. So that is absolutely what we do in the now and what we should do and need to do, and not just say, well, you screwed up, you're not gonna graduate, your life is done. Of course not. Of course not. And truth be told, if you have the privilege and resources and support to not go through all of that and just go ahead and have that inspiration for life, and you know, artists are good with that. Like, I have my skill and talent, I don't need all of that. I'm just gonna run with it. That's beautiful, that's wonderful. That's great. I hope they don't have to pay rent in San Francisco, because it ain't gonna work. And so that is a unfortunate reality that's like what we should do versus what we could do versus what the reality is for these folks that we're saying. My kid, he was in tears when we were like, but son, you could be a graphic. We were trying to help route him into a career option as an artist that would allow him to sustain himself. He just wanted to draw. He was like, I like drawing, I'm gonna be an artist. We were like, okay. So then we had to back off and say, well, he's 10. Okay, give him some time to grow up and figure that out. But you stress out, and that's what the adults. And then the other piece is where we have these expectations of these children to know and be prepared and be on top of their own life course. As a child, I wasn't that mature or evolved at all, right? So, other comments? Thank you. 1 and 2, yes.
Thank you. I think as an institution and as a district, we need to flesh out in greater detail looking at judgment versus consideration. When we're looking at kids who are labeled as troublemakers, we need to be able to think outside the box more, because I think that in some ways we're very good at providing support and hearing students, at least among counselors and social workers. That's kind of what we're very passionate about. But I think that too often we stifle innovation of the thinkers in the district, of people who want to try new things and do new things, and we stifle innovation with our students, and we ignore their trauma, we ignore their background and how it affects how they proceed through life.
Thank you. Absolutely. Other comments? Oh, right there.
I think sometimes as adults we complicate things. I think that when you begin to talk to kids about what they want to do when they grow up, it's about helping them learn how to dream. And the dream may start as an artist at 10, and then it may develop into an engineer at 11. It may then become a construction worker at 13. It may, I think, again, it's about thinking about different things that I might be able to do in my lifetime that adults forget to do with their children, because I will talk to children and no one has talked to them about what would you like to do as you get older. And it may be an artist, it may be this, it may be that, but the idea of having a flexible mind, of changing, even in college. I'll have students panic in college. Oh my God, I need to know a career. No, you need to give yourself a chance to play with different ideas of careers. So I think sometimes it's about allowing people to play with different ideas and not worrying about how much they're going to be able to make later, because they may not choose to live in San Francisco. They may have to live in Tucson where it is cheaper. I mean, but they still might do what they love to do.
Right. They just got to go to San Francisco to sell their art to the, no, just kidding. Absolutely. I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do when I grow up. I honestly and truly am. In the back.
I'm thinking of a research paper I read that says nowadays, it's not like it was even 50 years ago, the person that is most successful has changed careers multiple times. They make more money, they feel better about themselves, they have more interesting jobs because they're flexible and can change careers. It used to be they looked for a faithful person that stayed at one company. It's no longer that way. So, you know, I believe, and even as science and technology is expanding, one of my kids works for NASA, one of my kids is an engineer that has gone into multiple kinds of engineering. And I think that the more options we give our kids in the school system, the better off they'll be. And to narrow it down, which kids tend to do, I'm going to be a football player, I'm going to be a basketball player, that we need to broaden them so that there's lots of things they'd love to do and that they are well prepared in lots of different areas in order to help them be the most successful.
Absolutely. And what's always interesting is when you go to school, you learn about the issues, right? And you learn about how to solve the issues. And then when you go to the conference, they're like, what job are you going to get, right? And so you're absolutely right, where the expectation, and so the byproduct of the changing landscape of employment and, right, you used to have superintendents for 10, 20 years and principals for 10, 20 years. Now it's like, we've had this principal for 3 years, woo-hoo, right? And so, because of that, you have this increasing level of instability, right? You at least had with that superintendent that's been there for 20 years, a stable level of disrespect happening throughout. But, you know, at least everybody knows what they're supposed to do, and there's not, you know, all this jock. It takes a tremendous amount of resource to switch superintendents. I don't have to tell you, right? And it takes money, it takes position, because you got to change. We were 10 meetings into this one project, now we got a new leader, and we're doing something different. And we're starting from scratch. It's frustrating, it's maddening. And so that's the unfortunate byproduct of all those great successful people that are just, you know, getting poached all over the place. But how is it leaving our systems, right? So just like we have a problem with how we're supporting our young people who are not being supported and tracked into society as successful, functional human beings, but those that we give all the privilege and support to and deference to, and it's actually still not helping our system. You had your hand up? Or you just, okay. Don't make any sudden moves. I'm gonna put a mic in your face. Folks are like, yes. Okay.
So I'm going back to that question where you said, you know, is high school for everybody? And one of my first thoughts was, as a school counselor, I have a group of students, mostly boys, I'm not sure why, but that just aren't interested in school. They're just not, for whatever reason. I don't know if it's because of the system, they can't sit in the classroom for that long, they might need a different environment, type of learning, whatever. But as a counselor, I struggle with that. It's just, what do we do with those students that just, education is just not their thing? You know, I don't know, it's frustrating because that's how they get jobs, that's how they succeed, but what about those kids? That's just so frustrating.
And with boys in high school, sometimes it's something happening to them that is negative, right? There's an effect that's happening that negatively affects their concept of themselves. And there's also a byproduct of being privileged, where you don't have to worry about stuff or think about stuff. And again, I like the historical references in the room, right? Traditionally, teachers were men, professors were men, and then when women came into the teaching profession, then it got devalued. And so when you talk about college, right, men were only going to college, women were expected to, right, go to college to find their husband. And now you have way more women in college than men, right? And what does that affect? What effect does that have on our society for males or for women, right? I don't know. But that's a good question. When you see a phenomenon like that, those are the type of questions that you want to ask. You want to say, what is it, not only what is it about these boys where they're not interested in college, maybe finding out the boys that are interested in college and finding out why they're interested. Or finding out why are girls interested in college and what is it that they're saying that the boys aren't saying, right? So there's a really good exploration. And again, I throw that question out there and it gets people every time, but And that's what it's supposed to do. That's exactly why I mess with y'all. So did you walk out of here with more questions than answers? Any other comments? Well, yes.
Well, going back to what the previous speaker just said about boys, just typically school praises behavior that girls are good at, sitting still and being quiet and listening, and it does not praise the behavior that boys are good at as much, and boys do struggle more with sitting still and being quiet. So by the time you get out of elementary school, boys are already feeling like they're at a disadvantage for school because they do not get praised for their behavior nearly enough. So I think that's part of the problem with boys. And if you work in middle school at all, middle school boys are, I mean, it's crazy.
Right, so if the subtle messaging that we're giving boys throughout elementary, middle, and high school is they're rambunctious, oh, boys, 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 right, then we're consistently sending them the message that they're not compatible to the learning environment. And girls are also a little more clever and sweet and able to finesse situations at a younger age. And it comes from being aware and not having that privilege or that deference necessarily, right? And it also comes from, you know, and that was a stereotype alert, right? So it comes from stereotypes, right? It comes from stereotypes that people have to come in and find out, oh, what is the expectation of me? Oh, to be over here? Okay, let me go over here, right? And so, yeah, I'm getting the feeling y'all are just about done with me. And so, I'm okay. I'm okay with that. Yes, sir, one more.
Just curious. You told us you are from California, in the city of Oakland. I'm from Africa, and I help refugee students. I want to know if in your city you have some ELD program. How do you help those students who come from different countries? They don't speak English, and they want to learn, they want to go to college. How do you help them? And they have different cultures.
Different culture. Yeah. So the high schools have separate schools within the school, which is specialized to their needs and isolating, right? Double-edged sword, there it is again. So you just throw them in the classroom is problematic, right? Because they do the same thing with the behavior. They say, well, we're not really communicating with this kid as much, but they smile a lot, so we're just gonna put them over here, right? So what they've done at Castlemont School next door to mine, because in Oakland we've also had a significant influx of immigrants from all over. And it's increasing. So we have a high population in Oakland of immigrant students and homeless students. And we're currently trying to figure out how best to serve them. But the best thinking they've done so far is let's give them a specialized program, which also isolates them. So we're still trying to figure that out as a society. How do you work with a population that has special needs and not isolate them? Like the alternative school idea, worst idea ever. I wrote a whole policy paper calling it educational hospice, right? Because you're just trying to get the attendance. I'm sorry, I'm gonna say it, right? So you have to figure out specific ways with immigrants, with language, right? Will we have to accept or reject? Here's where we get to the values again. Whose country is this? Right? Do we say, well, we're gonna hire adults that speak the language of the students from the countries that they're coming from? Are we gonna create an educational system that works with different cultures? Sounds like what we need in our general ed, but that's just me. So yes, we struggle. We struggle significantly, especially because of the cultural differences, right? When you have teachers who are reprimanding one student and this other kid smiles every time, and the teacher thinks that the kid is laughing at them, but they're totally uncomfortable every time the teacher's yelling at another kid, and they're just like, and that's how they freak out, is they smile. And then that teacher, because of cultural mismatch which is a phenomenon, right? Black girl asked a question, she was a little bit loud, sounded a little bit threatening. You sound angry, you know, right? As opposed to, why are we right? As opposed to a guy, right? So we assign different stuff. So same thing with culture. We totally don't understand necessarily the cultural nuances that are coming into our schools and our communities. And it wouldn't be that hard to spend some time with those cultures, and not just any parent, but somebody who is a cultural expert, or you know, somebody from a church or from established institution that could educate us, right? All right. Unless there is a burning comment, we'll do. So this was the groundwork for talking about introducing the concept of trauma so that we could talk about how do we operate as a system, addressing culture, and then how do we dissect the approach, and how do we look at our value system, how do we look at our own capacity to self-reflect, how do we set the table to do this work? And so that's what today was about. Next week I'm gonna get back over here, and we're gonna get deeper into the interventions, right? So as a part of my research, as a part of the work I've done here at Tucson, I've learned some stuff about you all and how awesome you guys are in some of your interventions. And so we're gonna connect some of those interventions to some of the research around the interventions that help us address the trauma. And the reason why I connect trauma to culture is because, and we'll get into this next week, the importance of knowing and understanding trauma, but the study and addressing trauma does not get us where we're trying to go. It's like diagnosing the problem, right? Culturally responsive with a consideration to the trauma is the direction we need to go, because just like the last question, we're dealing with different cultures, and that for sure is a durable problem that keeps cropping up because we continue to default to one standard culture, and that is the culture of American schools. So we're going to do that next week, and please bring more questions, and I look forward to it. Thank you.